Welcome to 1 of 200, the media and politics podcast. We're here in campaign season. The election is quickly approaching. Well, we're in June. It is June the 4th. It feels a lot closer than it is, I think. I'm joined by my co-host, Dillon. How you doing, Dillon?
I'm doing all right, just dealing with the state of the world and dealing with the news influx as it is. You know, how things go.
Yeah, the way we always feel every time
Yeah.
we turn the recording on.
Thank
And
goodness current affairs is off the air for the moment because there's just so much.
Yeah, well, that's part of the reason we decided to, if you've been following, we decided to step back a little bit from current affairs and do a few more kind of long form conversations around specific issues. And that's what we'll be doing this evening. We're joined by Asher Wilson Goldman. Welcome to the podcast, Asher.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
So you're currently doing a master's in public policy. You've worked throughout the public service. There's a little bit of discussion earlier in the week, which is why I reached out to you around the kind of sneaky changes to legislation that
Yeah.
this government added into their urgency kind of push earlier in the week, which made it legal to automate, what do you want to say, processes around denying or approving people's access to welfare.
Yeah, I mean, the Social Security Modernization Amendment Bill, and who could be opposed to modernization, right? Everyone loves being modern. But yeah, it was pretty sneaky, passed under all stages urgency, so no select committee, no public consultation, just shoved straight into Parliament and straight through the entire process, and it comes into effect on 1 July, so less than a month away. A bill that none of us even knew existed not that long ago. It's pretty terrifying in some ways. I think the quote that I found from it was that allows MSD to approve the use of an automated electronic system by a specified person to make any decision, exercise any power, comply with any obligation, or take any other related action under any specified provision. And that's, about as broad as it gets, really. It does have the last three words, with appropriate safeguards. So, might have to think about what might be an appropriate safeguard and do you really trust them to put them in place?
I will say, like, from the looks of it, like that wording kind of existed there before, but there was also a provision that said these are the circumstances where you can actually make use of this power. But then the amendment is just completely getting rid of that list, so you can have carte blanche to just do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, it turns it from something that was really tight and specified and publicly able to be known into something significantly more opaque, that MSD could do this without people really understanding that. And I read an article from Mark Dolder on Newsroom, which I thought was really good, where he talks about OAA releases that show that actually MSD are already doing this in a range of areas without this law even being passed. Mandatory eligibility reviews for a number of benefits. They've got automated decision making to allow the cancellation of benefits granted on medical grounds if there wasn't a medical certificate provided quickly enough. All these other things like the childcare subsidy, orphans benefit, potentially some of that's already automated by MSD without anyone really knowing. And it's so much harder to challenge an unfair decision made by an unfeeling robot if you don't realize that there isn't a person at the other end.
Yeah, and so in some ways, this is like you almost get the sense that they're trying to push this through under urgency retroactively because this is about to come out. Whenever we get this kind of information, it suddenly makes sense of a whole bunch of stuff that's been happening to people who have been having to deal with these systems that I've been hearing about. Especially some of that medical certificate stuff where people are like, but we didn't even get a chance to send this in.
Yeah, totally. And I think, the way that MSD or WINS, whatever you want to call it, works these days is really different to what I think a lot of people in New Zealand will remember from, say, the early 2000s, the 90s, people who were involved in that benefit system when they were younger or students potentially. And that's not to say it was perfect back then, because, oh boy, it wasn't. But we're in a place now where for most people, they often have very few interactions with a consistent human. They may have to attend a course, but that's probably with someone they've never met before. They will have to email things in or submit things online or sometimes drop them off in person. But again, it's not to a consistent person. You don't have that case manager necessarily for most people going to work and income. There's not that case manager relationship where you can actually build an ongoing kind of rapport and understand that if something goes wrong, you know the person to talk to fix it. Now it's you know something's or you think something might be wrong, but you're not even sure what the rules were or who to talk to or even how to get hold of someone or what rights you may have to question it. And we know every study that's ever been done shows that the benefit fraud that does exist is far, far, far outweighed by the underpayments that people are entitled to but aren't getting. And if people got everything that they were entitled to, oh boy, would our benefit system look completely different to how it does. I mean, it's just this automated system really does seem to me to be a way to make it easier, cheaper, and faster for MSD to cut people off, which leaves the burden on those people to then argue for why they should be put back on.
Yeah. And in the meantime, they can just be put into an automated decision process over that as
Yeah,
well. It's
absolutely.
it's really rather worrying that this comes alongside these claims by the government. I think Paul Goldsmith was one of the main people fronting it alongside Willis for the budget itself, where they're hoping to cut even more jobs from the public service. And part of the reason they think they can get away with that is they're going to replace some of those efficiencies with AI. And then Goldsmith was following up on that to say, oh, we can worry about regulation after we've replaced all these roles with AI. And you're just like, wait a fucking second.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and they've been asked multiple times, what do you actually mean by we can replace these roles with AI? And how are you using AI? How are you demonstrating and modeling this in your own offices? And what we get is, oh, sometimes I let AI look at my speeches and offer some wording. And it's like, cool. So how many public servants are you planning to fire so that AI can look at their speeches? Like, it's just absolutely ridiculous. This complete lack of any understanding of the work that actually goes on in the public service.
Yeah, and you get a feeling that some of it is a pure lack of understanding, like they really don't know. And some of it is just to create plausible deniability, and justify what they're doing. They're like, oh yeah, well, we don't really care. But we can kind of hand wave it away by saying XYZ.
Yeah, and if you look at the cuts that they're proposing, that there's 2% this year and then 5% each of the next 2 years, you've got to assume that that's deliberately lower in that first year because it's an election year. They don't want the majority of those people getting onto the dole queue in an election year. They don't want people starting to really notice the degradation of services that the public service provide to everyone in Aotearoa in an election year. And so they've backloaded it so that they can get through the election. They hope get back in. Obviously, I hope differently. And then really put these culling boots on and start to kick public servants to the curb. And it's awful, right? Like I live in Wellington. Well, I grew up in Wellington. I live in the Kapiti Coast now, but I still work in Wellington. And I was made redundant by this government not long after the last election, in that first round of
Well, they
cuts.
front load it as well as backloading it, right?
Yeah, yeah, basically. Straight after the election, get in as hard and heavy as they can, then have a couple of years to try and work out what the hell they're doing, because clearly they didn't know, and then get up another plan to do it again. And it's awful. The morale in the public sector in Wellington is tanked. It's not even tanking anymore, it's just tanked. Same with Wellington as a whole, because yeah, while the public service is the largest employer in Wellington, most of the other large employers also rely on the public service. Whether that's the consultancies that everyone loves to hate, who get lots of their work out of the public service, or the cafes on Lambton Quay that Nicola Willis claims to be a big supporter of, while their customer base is shrinking to near zero, or the retail shops in Wellington. Like, it doesn't matter where you are in Wellington, most of your clientele are public servants if you're not a public servant yourself. And so when you cut thousands of jobs out of Wellington, and let's not forget that lots of these jobs will be cut in the regions as well, but when you cut thousands of these jobs in Wellington, it kills the entire city. And then if you think about the regions, for most people who have public service values, if you live in a provincial town, your council and the public service are the only places that you have to work. So for a government that claims to care about provincial New Zealand, you know, what's that going to do to Rotorua? What's that going to do to Napier? What's that going to do to Ashburton when the public servants that live there get their jobs cut? They're not going to stay. They're going to move to a big city where they've got a better chance of finding work,
Yeah,
or they're going to leave New Zealand completely.
yeah,
So we're going to see these public service cuts not only hurt Wellington, which, let's be honest, the coalition don't seem to care about because they don't get any votes here anyway, but it's also going to really hurt provincial New Zealand. And I think that's something that their supporters probably don't really understand yet.
Because I did the figure. I looked at the figures for the public service because recently, National or with Paul Goldsmith announced so what they want to target like 22,000 employees in the public service is their target at the moment. I think.
They want to cut 8,500 to 9,000
Right. Because I
over the
looked
next few
at
years.
the stats because like when they first got in and then like a year into the this coalition government, they did do a lot of cuts, but they were also like hiring at a very similar rate. But then ever since then, it's just been down, down. So they've been cutting since they've got into power, and yet apparently this is still not enough for them.
Yeah, and I mean, look, a lot of those hiring were in different places. You know, lots of that hiring is in corrections. The government is going gangbusters on prison guards. Whew, if you're a prison guard or you want to be a prison guard in New Zealand at the moment, guaranteed there's a job for you. But if you're a nurse, you're screwed. And this is the thing, right? So yes, the numbers overall have stayed relatively static. You know, surprisingly so, given how many roles they've cut. But it's been a real shift in what those roles do, and it's been a shift towards primarily prison guards, the fastest growing job in the public sector right now over the last few years. The other thing I'd say is that if you're gonna cut 8.5, like these cuts haven't stopped, as you said. Every time I catch up with another friend who works in a different agency, I hear, oh, we're about to go through another restructure. I've got friends who've been affected in restructure proposals at three or four different workplaces in the space of 2 or 3 years.
hmm
You know, you get made redundant, you find a new job. 6 months later, you get made redundant again. You find a new job. 6 months later, you get made redundant again. You find a new job. Like, that's just so hard on you and on your whānau. You can't make plans. You know, I've got friends who've been thinking about having kids who can't do that. I've got friends who've been thinking about buying a house who are too scared to do that. I've got friends who want to put down, these are people who want to put down roots, but without secure jobs, it's so hard to do. You know, a junior staff member who used to work for me in one of my old workplaces recently moved overseas. And before she left, we caught up for coffee. And she said to me, I can't find a job. If I find a job, I probably won't be able to keep it. If I keep it, I'm still not going to be able to afford to buy a house. So why would I stay? Like,
yeah.
what is there for me to stay for? And I had nothing to respond to that. You know, I just stood and went,
Best
yep,
wishes
actually,
overseas.
fair
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, yeah.
Like, enjoy London.
We were talking about this
Go as well.
in another recent episode. I talked with Tila Moose from the Tertiary Education Union about the destruction of the polytechnics, which are similarly like really important to the regions, right? Because it you can train to do the thing you want to do in the place that you're from, and you can keep your roots there, and you're getting expertise and skills that you can then bring back to the community. With the underfunding, what do you say, the privatization models that have kind of been pushed out in the last, even just the last 3 years as well, less and less of those are able to function in regional centers.
Yeah.
People leave the regions to the big cities, and as you say, from there go overseas.
And I mean, look, where I live in the Kapiti Coast is a great example of that. We had a Polytech campus here in Paraparaumu, and that closed probably about 5 years ago. And I talked to folks who are, you know, on the Chamber of Commerce and involved in small businesses out here, and they talk about the impact that that's had on them, and also on their kids, their nieces, their nephews, their neighbors, all that kind of thing. Like that, people who grow up here have to leave to study now, unless you're lucky enough to get an apprenticeship. But those are few and far between. And maybe you don't want to be a tradie, but yeah, with the closure of the Polytech, people now have to go into Wellington to study, and that's an hour commute. And so you're probably not going to do that every day. You're probably going to leave and move into Wellington. And it's the same for so many other places that are facing this threat of Polytech closures. You know, if you can't study locally, then you're going to leave. If you can't find a job locally, then you're going to leave. And it comes back to that question for me of what do we have to stay for? And I don't want to be totally cynical and depressed because like I love living in Kapiti. It's a great place. I'm really excited to be here. And I love living in New Zealand. It's the place I've lived most of my life. And I want to stay here. But there are definitely times where I question actually, is there a future for me in this place? And I'm in a pretty privileged position. You know, I've
Yeah.
been a public servant for a long time. I've got a lot of really good experience. I've worked in some pretty senior roles on some pretty big things. But if even I'm going, actually, is there still a place for me in this country? Then there's a whole lot of other people less fortunate than me that are going to be asking that question too.
And these changes under urgency, and these justifications of the changes, on the basis of the cuts or like going hand in hand with the cuts, feed that cynicism, right? Feed that like, fuck, I actually can't survive here if they're going to do this to us. I want to swing back around to that more specifically because the immediate response from everyone, which was great to note that there are enough people kind of in the poll media space here to immediately click on this was a comparison with RoboDebt in Australia. Asher, you've been studying about this. Do you want to give us
Yeah.
like a quick crib notes for people who haven't heard about what that is?
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, like as part of my master's, we've literally been studying this as an example of what not to do. And that to me has just made it so much more astounding that the government passes under all stages of urgency a bill to allow them to effectively do just this. So RoboDebt was in Australia and it started mid 2016. It was basically the introduction of an automated system with minimal human oversight that would send out debt collection notices to beneficiaries. And to do that, it would calculate how much it thinks they earned. Similar to New Zealand, when you get a benefit in Australia, you can earn up to a certain amount. Anything above that, your benefit starts to get abated, or you get none entirely if you earn enough. And so this automated system calculated by taking your most recent income and then assuming that you had a stable, full-time, permanent income of that amount, which we know for people in insecure work, which is frequently beneficiaries, is just not accurate. People are occasionally in stable part-time work, but if they were in stable full-time work, they probably wouldn't be on the benefit to begin with. And more frequently, they're on unstable casual labor, you know, doing a shift here or there,
Yeah.
picking up a little bit of work here if they're lucky. And so these calculations were wrong, and the system also shifted the burden of proof. So that if you wanted to say, hey, these calculations are wrong, the onus was on you to prove that you hadn't been overpaid rather than on the Department of Social Security to prove that you had. And so this affected hundreds of thousands of people across Australia. You know, an incredibly large number of people who got bills for debt repayment that were just sometimes absolutely ludicrous. And what it meant was that people would take on extra jobs to try and repay this debt because they just felt like they couldn't fight it. They sold things that they couldn't afford to lose. And some people ended up committing suicide. You know, real tragedy that they were so scared and so threatened by these debt notices the government was sending them that they ended up feeling like there was no way out. And even on its own terms, the most amazing thing I think about this is that on its own terms, RoboDebt wasn't particularly successful. Like even if you think that that was a good idea, by from mid 2016 when it started till the late 2019, it had cost just over 600 million Australian and it had recouped less than 800 million Australian. So only a small fraction more than it cost. And there were multiple inquiries into this because a lot of people realized there was something going on, something wrong. And there were a number of really amazing public servants who whistle blew throughout this period and were ignored or punished by their higher ups. Ombudsman inquired, there were Senate inquiries, and there were court cases. And in late 2019, so 3 years, 3.5 years later, the government was instructed by the courts to stop issuing debt notices without evidence. Like, it's amazing that it takes a court order to say you can't force people to pay back debt unless you can prove that they owe it. But that's what the court had to do. And 6 months later, the government scrapped the whole plan because clearly, when you're required to provide evidence, it all fell over. The Labour government, so just after they scrapped it, they actually acknowledged that it was pretty fucked up. And the Liberal government at the time announced a payment of $1.2 billion Australian to 400,000 people impacted.
So that kind of undermines the money recruiters even further.
Yes, exactly. So it ended up costing
We're
them
talking pure
significantly
numbers.
more than they ever got back. One of so the Labour government in 2023, when they came in, they started a royal commission. It was a campaign promise of theirs, one of
Mhm.
the good things they have done. It was to set up this royal commission into RoboDebt, and that revealed some pretty awful things, beyond the awfulness that I've already talked about. I think one of the things that I found most astounding was that the government knew that this was illegal before it even started. So these are the laws that were ended up using in the court case where the federal government forced them to provide evidence before issuing a debt notice. The government knew that it was illegal to not do that before it even started in
Oh,
2016. And one of the things that came out was that the Department of Social Services was continually preparing draft legal advice, as good public service lawyers do. But when that advice didn't align with what the government wanted, they were directed not to finalize it. Because if it wasn't finalized, then the government never officially received it. And if it wasn't finalized, then it wasn't findable under the Australian equivalent of the OAA.
that part's also sounding really familiar right now.
Yeah. And so, it's this absolute clusterfuck for 3.5, 4 years, hundreds of thousands of people impacted, and ends up costing the government way more than they ever got back.
Well, that's the
And why?
case
It
of
was
just
just,
any system of trying to catch benefit fraud or people who
yeah,
are supposedly abusing the system is almost always trying to even figure out who these people supposedly are cost you way more than it would be to just pay people what they are owed.
exactly, exactly. And all this comes back to a lot of it comes back to yes, some senior public servants did some pretty gross things, but ultimately their governance, so the ministers who were in charge, and the minister who was in charge of the Department of Social Services when RoboDebt began was Scott Morrison, who not long after became the Prime Minister of Australia. So he was the Liberal Party Minister for Social Services. He started this, and then when he became Prime Minister, he handed it on to another one of his cabinet colleagues. But it's just, where is the accountability? There were some people following the Royal Commission who were referred to the police and to the court system. I don't know exactly what's happened to all of that. Scott Morrison was referred to the Independent Commission Against Corruption for some of his actions there, but it was found basically that there wasn't enough evidence that he knowingly did what he did, as opposed to receiving bad advice about what he did, and so he managed to get away with it.
So far.
But it's just, and this is the sort of thing that we run a very real risk of with this new law. It is entirely possible. Everything that we're taught about public management and public policy failure in our master's degree, things like this, things like the Grenfell Tower fire in the
Oh
UK,
yeah.
even things like leaky homes here in
Hmm.
Aotearoa. This is stuff where public servants either find their work automated or contracted out, regulation removed, human checks removed. Yes, the public service moves slowly. Everyone always says that. It's a huge criticism of the public service. And to some extent, there's some fairness in that. But one of the reasons the public service moves slowly is because we understand that when we get something catastrophically wrong, it kills people.
Yeah.
And that's really different to most other sectors of the economy. Most other places, if they get something wrong, they might lose their job or go out of business. If we get something wrong, people die. And so that brings with it a gravity to your decision-making process. It brings with it additional checks and balances. And if you remove the human element from that, Yeah, you're just throwing things away.
Even in the context of like automated systems, it can sometimes feel like these things move slowly. Like when you hear that, oh, most of the world's banking and most of like government finance is run on like really old mainframes and old programming languages, you're like, well, why hasn't this been updated? But there's usually good reasons for these. Like these things are really hard to get right, and if someone got it right in the 1980s, it's still going to be right now. And like from because like I've done some like cursory looking into like COBOL because my day job is a programmer. I don't need to know COBOL, but it's an interest. And like so many things still use these old languages in automated systems precisely because they are designed to get things right in important situations where getting it right matters. And moving fast is encouraging government or any or institutions that adopt too quickly. It encourages them to end up in situations where the old Facebook slogan of "move fast and break things" on a government level, breaking things breaks a lot of things, and it breaks everything.
Yeah, it does. And look, there are times where you can move fast, and I think we saw a lot of that in COVID. I mean, I worked in the COVID National Crisis Management Centre, so that's the all of government response to COVID. I led the team or co-led the team that ran the Unite Against COVID website. And we did move fast, and we, not just us, all of the other teams working on that moved fast because we had no other option,
Yeah.
right? But that takes investment. We had at one point just to run that website, which at certain times was getting upwards of 15,000 visitors per second, probably one of the most popular websites in New Zealand of all time for that brief window in that first lockdown. We were running 3 shifts a day, 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, that was people volunteering. That was public servants volunteering. We didn't get paid to do that work. We just did it because we knew it was important and it mattered and we had the skills. But if you want to do that on an ongoing basis, then you've got to pay for it. That's how you move fast. If you want to break things in a way that they can be broken without doing damage so you can learn from it, that takes real planning. And again, that takes people and that takes money. This government has shown no desire to spend on people and no desire to spend really at all. Well, not on the things that matter. They still want to improve things, improve services. That's not how it works. We all know that if you keep taking money away, things are going to degrade, things are going to get worse. If you want to actually improve things, you need to invest up front. Invest up front, the people who do the work will innovate, and they do all the time. Public servants are innovating all the time. I see it in lots of my jobs. But that requires that upfront investment so that people have the time and space to not just deal with what's in front of them every single day, but actually to take a step back and go, how could we do this better?
Yeah.
You can't get that by cutting their jobs
No. Or by
or by bringing in an AI to do them for them.
Yeah.
for instance, I think that's one of the really concerning things with some of these changes as well, or at least what it opens up, is that we're not even really trying to claim that there's going to be a particular outcome of this. Like there are vague references to efficiency or cost saving, but not to like, okay, but what do you want your processes to do? Like, what is success? What is the success state for this? And alongside a decades long decades long arc of undervaluing the public service, but also villainizing and undervaluing people who are on welfare, who are receiving a benefit. Reports of people at WINS or MSD trying to ensure that people can't get what they should be getting. What would be a valid payment for them. People having to jump through hoops at best sometimes, not being told about what is available to them, just being told no when actually they should be able to get, say, like emergency payments or things like that. With that direction already pretty embedded among decision makers in some parts of the public service and definitely in governments. There's only like it almost feels like the outcome is that they want a RoboDebt situation. Like they do want to make people's lives worse, and like, we talk about the term social murder, right? Policies which lead to the death of political policies that lead to the death of citizens.
Yeah.
And we know from RoboDebt that that kind of thing does happen.
I mean, not just that, like look at health and safety, but pre-Pike River.
Yeah,
Um, it's a direct contributor to all of those people that died down that mine. And we saw, thankfully, post Pike River, a bit of a change and some good new innovation, the Health and Safety and Work Act, not perfect, but a significant improvement on what came before. But again, this government has been determined to weaken that and to take us back to or somewhere closer to where we were pre-Pike River. And
yeah.
we surely we know the impact of what this is going to be. I mean, I think for me, it kind of almost doesn't really matter whether the government's doing this deliberately or not.
The outcome's the same,
There's
right?
this old saying, right? The purpose of a system is
Yeah,
what it
yeah,
does. And if your system kills people, then that's what it's there to do.
yeah.
Well, the
And
purpose of a system is what it does.
yeah,
Is like the
and
systems
it's
theory thing.
yeah, it, I don't yeah, I'm astounded constantly in ways that I shouldn't be, probably because I've been around long enough to know better.
No, no,
But
no. Keep that cynicism tamped down, right?
yeah, I don't know. If you knew me, maybe it wouldn't be that. It's not so tempted, but uh,
We just have to struggle.
yeah. But I mean, I think if you look at beneficiaries, I remember many, many, many years ago, I talked to someone who at the time was a long-term beneficiary on the unemployment benefit,
Yeah,
and this was through the late 90s and early 2000s. And they told me of a pilot which was under the Clark government. I can't remember whether it was very late 90s or very early 2000s, but under the Clark government. They were part of this pilot which would take long-term unemployment beneficiaries and offer them jobs as WINS case managers.
I do remember this.
And if they refused, then they'd lose their benefit for refusing a job. And so he took a job as a WINS case manager, and he decided very early on in his training that he was learning about what the rules were and what people were entitled to
Yeah,
and what they weren't. And he decided he was gonna proactively make sure that everyone who stopped at his desk to meet with him knew what they were entitled to and got everything they were entitled to. After I think 5 months or 6 months, he was let go, put back on the unemployment benefit, and I think the pilot was ended not long after, because I don't think he was the only one doing that,
no,
right? Because when you've been on a benefit and you've seen that, even if you get everything you're entitled to, it's still a hell of a horrible way to live.
it's intentionally set
It's
below
intentionally
that.
set below the bare minimum that you need to sustain yourself,
Yeah,
even if you get everything that you get, and most people don't. So when he went there to set out to actually make sure that people would get what they were entitled to, that was a problem.
yeah,
And that to me says a lot, right? It
yeah,
says a lot about the lack of respect and human dignity built into our welfare system.
yeah.
And it's not just the current government that's doing this. You look at the last government, you look at the Ardern government, the welfare working group was set up,
Yeah.
came up with some really solid ideas. Well, it didn't even come up with them. Most of them had been around a
But
long time,
yeah,
but pulled them together into a pretty solid report. And the government sat on their hands for years and did almost nothing with
yeah,
it. We saw during COVID, how when a government wants to and prioritizes it, they can support people, whether that's people at risk of losing their jobs, whether that's unhoused people and rough sleepers, whether that's anyone else who's like beaten down and undermined by the state as it currently exists. The government can do it. So if they're choosing not to, that's a deliberate choice. It's not some inevitable fate. It's a deliberate choice of successive governments of all
yeah.
stripes.
This is why Hipkins needed to do a policy bonfire when he came in following Ardern's
Indeed.
tenure, right? Say, oh, actually, we're not doing that. Let's reset back to being a bit more evil.
Yeah, but even and yes, like obviously that was awful, but also they'd been in government for how many
Oh,
years at
no,
that
yeah,
point?
absolutely.
And this is the thing is, like as Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern was very, very good at some things.
Yeah,
And she deserves real credit for that. The way that she held people together through that, particularly through that initial COVID period, but also in response to other crises like Whakaari, like Christchurch, some real impressive, empathetic leadership. But at the same time, she was incredibly weak on a lot of other things, and I don't think she gets enough criticism for that. It's really easy and sometimes quite satisfying to blame Chris Hipkins once he came in, but the die was already
Don't
cast.
worry, you're on the right podcast to be criticizing Jacinda Ardern. No, I mean, you're absolutely right as well. And this is why I said this is an arc over decades, right?
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, this has been going on since Rogernomics. You know, the original sin of this arc was by the Labour Party, and we
Totally.
haven't
And
really shifted since then.
no, we haven't. And we talk about this like extensively through the Masters of Public Management that I'm doing as well. Like we study the evolution of the state and the evolution of public management and how the public service functions over decades. And this the idea what came in to New Zealand through Rogernomics was this idea of new public management, which was already a little bit established in other parts of the world as well. It's this real uh, corporatization of public services. And what we are seeing in New Zealand to some extent, and internationally to some extent as well, greater and lesser in different places, is a shift away from new public management, this corporatization of public service, towards what some theorists, and God, I hate talking about theory, but I will for a second, call public governance or new public governance. And it's this idea that public policy and service delivery cannot, if it is to be effective, cannot be delivered by either a bureaucratized state or a corporatized state,
Mhm.
but instead has to be co-produced by the state, public servants, and the people who use those services.
Communism.
Oh, there's a number of different names for it. Um, but yeah, and we do see little elements of that here. The Public Service Act, when that came in a few years ago, has in it that one of the core responsibilities and core functions of the public service is to facilitate active citizenship. If we actually saw that in a real way disseminate throughout the public service, that would radically change how we do things.
Yeah.
If we were forced to not just consult with people, but actually partner with them when we're creating policies or delivery plans for things that are meant to benefit them, that would radically change how we do things
Yeah.
and for the better. But it requires a willingness from those in charge to lose a little bit of their own authority.
And it does feel
And that
like,
shouldn't, and that's scary for them. And I get that that's scary, but every time it's tried to a slightly greater extent, it demonstrates results.
yeah, and it does feel like a lot of the policies of this coalition government that are around representation have been going in the absolute opposite direction at a breakneck pace.
Yeah,
Um,
completely and utterly. I mean,
and
we saw just the other day, what was it, yesterday, even the new changes that they're making in local government to essentially disallow, because, while it theoretically also disallows independent audited chairs on the audit and risk committees, we all know what it's there for, which is to specifically target mana whenua
yeah,
who have voting rights on council subcommittees. And this bizarre idea that those members who are delegated by mana whenua somehow aren't representatives in and of themselves, simply because they got there through a slightly different format than an election that only 23% of people bothered to vote in.
now we can't talk about that number. It's a yeah, it's a really shocking kind of series of events throughout this term, and we're now seeing as we're coming towards the election, bills continuing to be passed through urgency that are going to have generational effects. I guess just as like the final part of this conversation, I wanted to see what you thought, if you maybe ask you to mind read a little bit, what you think the National Coalition government is trying to, what outcome they are trying to get here, what their intent is in both the use of automation and with some of these public service cuts, because I think those two things are pretty heavily tied together narratively. And maybe like beyond that, what we can expect and how we can push back on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think look what they're trying to achieve, and it's the same with the use of urgency as well. It's all about embedding the changes that they've made over the past 3 years in case they don't get back in as deeply as possible. So making as many changes as possible and embedding them as deeply as possible. And their best friend in many respects here is Chris Hipkins, who said he wants to be a government of continuity, not of radical change. And so wow, we're gonna suddenly see if we are lucky enough to change the government this year, we're gonna see a new government that doesn't roll back any of these awful things. Well, that's pretty unappealing as a way to get voters to turn out. But I think, what we will see is if public services continue to be cut, then it lessens the capacity of public servants to do the work to roll back this stuff post-election.
Ah,
The fewer people you have in a public service, the more of that those people are focused on just executing BAU,
yeah,
and the less they will have the ability to do things. So if a new government comes in, they will have their own legislative agenda that they want to get in, and hopefully they'll want to roll back some of the existing changes that this government has made. It will be very hard for a stripped back public service to do both of those things at the same time.
yeah.
And so either way, the coalition either gets another 3 years to keep doing what they want to do, or they get 3 years where they will try and slow and delay in the hopes that they can get back in 2029 with a legislative corpus that actually probably won't be that different because the incoming government won't have, even if they have the desire, won't have had the capacity to make those drastic changes and reversals.
Because it's the same thing with like teachers and nurses and other parts of the country where it's much harder and takes much longer to bring people into that system than it takes to flick your wrist and pass a new law and or change the rules or fail to meet the current state of things, fail to meet inflation, fail to adjust for what people's wages to pay people what they're worth. It's far easier to do all those things and get people out of the system than it is to bring people in. So these destructive changes just mean that even if a government comes in with an agenda to reverse these things, it might not be enough time.
Yeah, and I think there's a real fear amongst governments of all stripes to just take things back to what they were. Rather, every government wants to put their own stamp on things. So, the last Labour government had a ready-made resource management pieces of legislation, right? But I can guarantee you right now, those will never see the light of day. They'll never come back. What we will get is some small tweaks
Yeah,
to nationals legislation, just like the Employment Relations Act under the Clark government didn't take things back to the status quo ante before the Employment Contracts Act. It just made some tweaks to it.
yeah,
And yes, those were tweaks to slightly make it less bad. But rather than look at something that was good or say, actually, let's go back to what we had because we can do that quickly and easily and then focus on creating something good, they instead spent their time going, how can we make a few minor tweaks to this to make the smallest possible difference that we can paint in a positive light?
yeah,
And governments of all stripes do this, right? Like it's why the key government never rolled back KiwiSaver. It wasn't worth the hassle for them to do that. And now it's so embedded that no one ever will. Yes, there'll be continued tweaks to how it works, but it's never going to be rolled back completely. And this government is hoping that for as many as possible of the changes they make, that will be the case as well. But I
and
guess in terms of what we can do, right? Like
yeah,
there's all the obvious stuff, voting and getting involved and blah, blah, blah. And yes, I'm not going to pretend that's not important because obviously it is. I think there's a real role, and there are still people who are genuine, good, hardworking trade unionists, left-wing activists who still see a role for the Labour Party. I'm not one of those people, but they are out there and I know them and I'm friends with some of them and
yeah,
they're good people. They have a huge job ahead of them because they are going to be the only ones who can, if it's at all possible, shift Labour towards actually what's needed.
yeah,
Because it's very clear that what we're getting from Labour now is not what's needed. And if, as they claim, there is a hope and there is still a role for Labour in a government of the left, then they need to step up and start delivering on that. And I know they're trying, and I wish them all the best of luck. I personally don't think it's going to be successful, but I wish them all the best of luck, and I hope to be proven wrong. There are lots of times where I would love to be wrong. For everyone else, I think what we do know is that new governments come in with a plan, but as soon as that initial wave goes, there's a whole lot of room for what happens next. And so it's about all of us working out what are the things that we need once that first 100 days are over. What are the things that we can do now to prepare for that next year and a half? What are the things that we can do? There are a bunch of people with really good resources, whether that's organizations and NGOs or individuals with personal expertise who can do things like pulling together draft legislation now and starting to meet with parties of all stripes on our side of the politics to get their thinking around that, so that and after that first 100 days, the start of that coalition is over. What happens next, we can push for from the outside.
Kia ora. And look, honestly, it sounds doable. I believe.
Yeah, I hope it is. I really do hope it is. Because I really worry about the people that are leaving now.
Yeah,
It feels qualitatively different to when I was in my 20s, where lots of people left, but with a plan to come back. People leaving now, more often than not, in my experience, the folks that I'm talking to have no plan to come back other than for holidays and to visit family.
yeah.
And we need to change things drastically so that New Zealand is a place where they go, actually, I want to come back. I want to bring what I have to offer back to build a better Aotearoa for everyone.
Because that's the thing, right? Like the people who are going offshore, who are going to look for opportunities to survive, often they're learning things over there and getting skill sets and learning to organize, and making a lot more money, that can be brought back here if this is like somewhere that they see a future for themselves. I think
Um,
there's a real possibility of creating a country again where people want to do that. So yeah, I
yeah.
think it's a
And
strong.
talk to your grandparents. Grandparents, I remember doing work years ago on the citizens initiated referendum around the partial sale of the
Hey, I worked on that one as
Ten Towers.
well.
And I remember at the time we were meeting with Grey Power, who were a
Yep,
key
yep.
player in that campaign, which was great. And I think we often, there's this feeling that older people are more conservative, and yes, on average, older people are more conservative than younger people, but older people really care about their grandchildren
Yeah,
in a way that parents often don't have the capacity to because they're so focused on survival.
yeah.
More often than not, our senior citizens really care about what kind of a country they're leaving for their mokopuna. And I think that that's a space that the left needs to claim, and often we shy away from and criticize boomers, and these people are actually older than boomers often. But I think we need to embrace old people. And maybe that's because I live in Waikanae, which is one of the oldest towns in New Zealand, highest average
Hey,
age.
look, everyone's
But
experience is different.
but it matters, and these people really like. If you talk about, what do you want? What kind of a future do you want to leave for your grandkids? Do you want your grandkids to be living in this country,
Yeah,
or do you want them to be running away because they don't see a future here? That's something that I find is really impactful for them.
yeah. And it's about being able to communicate that, hey, and what we want to do is the thing that gets us there. Because it's also what's being sold by the far right.
Yeah,
Like this is what's being sold by Winston Peters. This is what's being sold by ACT and by National, you know?
yeah. And Winston is very, very good at what he does. What he does is awful, but he's very good at it, and he's been doing it for a long bloody time. And unfortunately, he knows how to play the game.
I think we'll give it a wrap, on those wonderful words of support for Winston Peters. Uh,
Well,
um, Asher, if people want to find you, where can they do so? Where they can hear more of your musings.
oh God, we're social media, right? So it's an awful, awful place, and I go through periods where I try and avoid it, but I am generally on there. Asher and Carpety on Instagram, or Asher Wilson Goldman on Blue Sky. You can find me on there. Sometimes I rant on other places as well, but just I'll always share that on my socials.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us as a guest. And Dylan, thank you for joining us as the co-host this evening. Do you want people to find you online?
No.
Fantastic. And they won't.
Oh, you can. You just shouldn't.
Like, share, and subscribe if you've enjoyed this. If you think it's adding some good, useful dialogue to the campaign season, we'll be back throughout the next few months, continuing to have these longer form conversations about particular issues that we feel are really important to talk about coming into what is going to be a generationally important election, in my opinion, as much as the political and media space is unwilling to let us know that at this point. I think even they, in 2 or 3 months, are going to start going, "Oh, wow, this is a big one." As more things stack up. So keep informed, keep listening, get out, organize, talk to your grandparents, and we'll catch you on the next one. See you then.
Beat down the gates, you did it again, and invite to the party. Golden Dawn was just